That's really not from Turtle.
Welcome everyone to Finding Your Voice panel here. We've got some esteemed guests, perhaps some more joining us soon. But I figure we do some introductions and get started. So, Gary, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you're working on?
Yeah, hello. My name is Gary Furlong. I'm audiobook narrator. I am currently working on. It's a sad book about pets, so I don't want to talk about it. But it's fun, kind of, not really, but I like it. Whatever. Other than that, I narrate a lot of romance and some sci-fi and fantasy, which calls for finding your voice. Nice segue to whoever's next.
Excellent. Dawn.
Hi everyone, I'm Dawn Chapman. Most people know me from the groups. I kind of write sci-fi lit RPG, general, lots of different things really.
Excellent. Neil.
I'm Stephanie Nemeth Parker.
Stand in for now.
I'm standing. Yeah, for now. She's in Norway. Typical stuff. Classic Stephanie. Yeah, I'm crashing, guys. Hi. I am a narrator. I narrate, I guess, mostly along the lines of genre of various kinds, including game lit, sci-fi, and occasionally some literary fiction finds its way in here. Occasionally some nonfiction of the sort of historical or constitutional history variety. And I am a lot of fun at parties.
Awesome.
Yes, you are.
Can second that.
Yes.
Cheers.
Absolutely.
Steve.
I'm Steve Campbell, also a narrator, and most of the stuff I do has to do with lit RPG cultivation, but I do also dabble in the traditional fantasy, sci-fi, and some romance and nonfiction stuff. So I like to play in a lot of pools. I like to play in a lot of pools, and
You like peeing in a lot of pools, Steve. That is disgusting.
I did not say
That
pee.
is-
I
that
did
is
not say pee.
vile.
I know that that's where you like to go when you think of play, you think of pee, but that's not where my head
absolutely
goes.
do.
Not in my wool. See, there's no pee in it.
So this panel is all about the various voices, how you find those voices in your narration, all of those different things that go into that creative process. And so to get the party started, let's start with the author and talk about what you're looking for in a narrator and what your process is in that. And then you've collaborated with some of these folks as well. What does that look like, that collaboration process between them?
So, I mean, obviously, as an author, I kind of came into it knowing absolutely nothing about narration, about voice acting. So when I first started out, it was really eye-opening to kind of see what actually goes behind the scenes in book production. I had no clue what I wanted for voices really until I started to actually listen to people. So I started with audiobooks about 2015 and sort of like really progressed because I was driving for a living then. So I just blew through loads of audiobooks and started to get to know what I wanted for characters that were in my head. So it was like kind of, you'd hear somebody and you'd be like, oh, they sound really good. I'd like to, perhaps get them one day to work on one of mine. I have worked with Steve and Neil Helligers and Stephanie, who isn't here. I haven't worked with Gary yet, but maybe one day. So there's a lot of different things I think you really need to think about when you're looking for a narrator. And it comes from, sort of like the voice that you do hear inside your head, but also what kind of sounds good as well for other people. Some new authors don't really have any idea whatsoever what kind of voices they think, because they don't listen to audiobooks as well. It's something that, you kind of have to sort of really be into it or have the time, and they don't get a lot of time, a lot of young people. It is getting more popular, especially with this genre, which is really good. So I like that side of it. I think the biggest thing is to just listen. I've got a lot of experience now because I do work as sort of like on the post-production side as well. So for some of my clients, I get to sort of like interview other narrators. And from a client perspective, I have an idea of the story that they want to tell, the kind of voices that they do like or don't like. And then I go into that in a slightly different way to pick different people, listen to different people. So that's kind of my experience.
So you've worked with Steve. What made that decision for you there? And Neil.
I can say I kind of do fangirl just like everybody else. You know, I've got my kind of people I really want to work with. For my stories, you do kind of listen to people for so long, and then you kind of get a real idea for who they can actually be in your story world. Steve really puts a great amount of emotion into his stories. So for certain pieces that I've worked with him on, they have to be really, really deep emotional characters, and so Steve really does bring that. So that's kind of like the person that Steve is, really.
I'm so emotional.
You're so emotional.
I have so many emotions. I don't know what to do with them all.
We have Stephanie sighting here.
Yes.
Does this mean I can go now, or
No, he's staying now.
No.
Don't you
have
dare.
to stay.
She's representing wearing a toque. I love
We
it.
have synergy in our
We do.
pictures now. So
It looks better.
oh yeah, balance. Yes.
So Stephanie, we were just talking with Dawn about their choices of narrators and how that process happens at the author side. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone as the late arrival here? Last
I'm
but
so
not
sorry.
least.
From Kuusamo, Finland. Hello. Yeah, I mean, I'm an audiobook narrator. I'm coming up on 200 and something plus audiobooks that I've done. My anniversary is next Tuesday. It'll be 4 years. I happened to find Dawn on Discord, and it's, I've never looked back, and just begged her to do every single thing she's ever written. Because I've been a gamer my whole life, and so I just love the idea of lit RPG, and I love fantasy, and I love sci-fi, and I mean, shoot, now that I have this cyberpunk whole collaboration thing, it's just a dream come true. So yeah, and so right now I'm in Finland on like a little vacation because I work so much. I nonstop for weeks on end and every day, and so, but I'm happy to be here now. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we're going to throw this out to the narrators of the audience. When a project comes in, or you're looking at a particular project, what we're talking about the voice pieces. What's your process on getting the feel of the book from the author and translating whatever's in their head to your microphone? And we'll start with Gary.
I have a little sheet that I send the authors, and I ask if they have time to fill it out. It basically tells me who they might cast in a movie as this certain character, any vocal characteristics they want as that character, and then just any other character notes about him. And I'll send them a file with all the voices. They can review it, and then they might say, oh, well, for this character, could we try something different? And we'll go back and forth until they're happy with every single voice that they've written down. And I'm happy to then just kind of go forward with the book and know that, I have references for all those characters because we just discussed back and forth. That's personally what I do.
Yeah. And Neil, what's your process like?
I mean, I guess it pretty much comes down to the prep for me, and this is the kind of thing for some narrators do a thing sometimes where they are, if they're pressed for time, they pay someone to prep, which I can see being a utility for nonfiction for pronunciations and things like that. But that time where I'm reading the book is where I'm plotting everything out in my head, and usually the process involves, if there's a main character, whether it's first person or third person informed or multiple main characters, that's kind of like my baseline, and I sort of set myself as that sort of lodestar in the center, and then everyone else is a reflection or a contrast based on that person. And as I go along, I'll sort of, there's all the factors that can go into certain genres, like Don was saying, especially the ones that are more audio friendly, will give you like this person says in a high reedy voice. So you're like, clear, got that one right there. If it's not there and there's artistic choices to be made over the course of that prep period where I'm reading the book, I'll sort of plot everything out, either with notes or in my head about, well, there's this person and then this person. If they have a lot of scenes together, I want their voices to contrast in some way so that at least the listener knows who's talking at all times and be as clear as possible. And then beyond that, there's the cultural landscape of the book, which with fantasy and sci-fi can be kind of whatever you make of it, or whatever clues or whatever world building is set by the author. And then and that's usually, if it's something a little farther afield, that's where I tend to work more closely with the author to be like, hey, what would you think about if I went this way or went in this direction with it? And then kind of work to kind of develop that idea. And then it's just a matter of finding choices that make sense, or finding choices that are interesting. Sometimes like it's tempting sometimes to make like off the wall choices. Like if a large physical character has a high pitched voice, that can be kind of interesting. But generally speaking, those voices come by like a large physical voice, a large deep voice, gravelly or otherwise, is a clear indication of physical size to the listener and kind of occupies their imagination a little more cleanly. And so those kind of choices tend to work. But then if you have like all romance books, when everyone has deep husky voices, you have to find like, why is this guy different than this guy? Why is different than this guy? And then you can get into pacing, and someone might be slower and more languid, someone might be faster and more staccato. All those things kind of layer in, and then I make little, just try to remember them and try not to creep them all and back into the middle again, basically.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. How do you keep track of all of the voices when it happens, right? How the deep husky one versus deep husky slow, right?
Yeah, I make a little clip of each guy and put them into a separate file, and right away. And because there are a whole series where I didn't do that, and then I come back to them later. I'm like, oh, that's right, awful. What was that guy's voice anyway?
It's the worst feeling ever.
Or when you
or the really small part.
Or we resurrect them.
Yeah.
That one guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one guy who's like has like 2 lines in like chapter 2 of book 1, but suddenly like book 4, he's like a huge guy, and you're like, oh. Huh.
And you voice him like this because you thought he's not going to show up again. It's like, he's the romantic lead.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You're so attractive.
That's when notes come in handy. That's when you have to give your narrator notes beforehand.
Yeah. And not change your mind later on, as I've had authors go, oh no, he's dead, completely, totally dead, he's gone. He's in the next book a lot. Oh,
He said in his distinct Welsh accent.
Yeah.
I literally had a
suggestion.
character that said like he sounds a lot like General Akbar from Star Wars, and he was a throwaway character, and then he had a goddamn chapter in the next book. I was just holding entire time, like it was actually a trap. See what I did?
I think Andrea Parsnow killed me because I had a dragon in like the beginning with Maddie's first books for Patera Online, and she came back in for the last book. And there was like whole chapters of this dragon that she had to do with this really, really deep, low voice. Yeah, she killed me. But it was good. She did a really good job though.
So have you ever suggested that an author just cut that part from the 4th book because you set a precedent for a voice that you didn't want to do?
I actually
prefer to punish ourselves. Actually,
I had one where I was doing a trilogy, and I did the first book, the second book, and there was a bad guy that shows up right away in the first book and is there present all the way through. And it isn't until 3/4 of the way through the third book, which hadn't been written when I did the first 2. And he says in his deep whatever, and I'm like, that is not how I played this character at all. Like it's completely different than the way I played that character. And I'm like, we're just getting rid of that one line. I'm not putting it in the book because it doesn't make sense. And we can't go and re-record these. They're already out.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's actually quite a few narrators do that I've worked with that just say, no, I'm just taking that line out because it's too late for that.
Yeah. And it was only one time, one line, and it just said, he said in his blah, blah, blah voice. And I'm like, we're not putting that in.
I had a similar thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary. Continue.
It was similar that I don't think book 2 had been written and book 1 was done, and no mention of any accents for a whole race of characters. It was an isekai thing, so they went to like a weird, strange world, and there was some weird animals there, were creatures there. And in book 2, it made a very specific mention of what they sounded like, and I did not do that for the first book. And so I put the word "some" in front of it. Some of these sound this way.
That was a good idea.
It was just like, I can't re-record that whole book.
No.
Yeah.
So Jeff Hayes just popped in with a comment talking about accent study, and so we can talk about that a little bit. When you're doing a non-native accent to you, what does that look like? How much study goes into that? We'll start down with Stephanie. What's your process for accents and other pieces other accents that you're not natively used to?
I mean, if it's something that's like, going to be a large part of the book, then I'll go, do a session with, like Amanda Quaid or PJ Auckland, someone who's like a really, who can really kind of get me into that accent. But I do a lot of accents. And I think it really, like Neil was talking about, like, it depends on the book and where it's set, right? Like this whole Artem series that we're doing was really decided that we're just going to kind of base everything with like kind of, American accents or whatever. So, there are no elves that have, that are British or whatever. So it was really kind of cool to have that established already, because it helps you so much kind of just know your playroom and wiggle room. But like I'm doing a book I'm prepping a book right now for Kyle Johnson. It's this Drone Rising series that I absolutely love. And it's the first time that we're having kind of extraterrestrials. And I was like, oh shit, what do I do now? Like, how do I differentiate it? I mean, in theory, everyone's talking like, through their, no one's really talking with their own voices, but there's got to be something a little bit different to set it off. So, it's that same kind of thing. Is it staccato kind of a way? Is it more musical, like my Hungarian relatives speak? This kind of, everything sounds like a song when they're speaking. So I really love the idea of playing with things that are a little bit out there that aren't so normally done, not always Scottish or Irish or whatever. So,
But
I think it's, sorry.
I was just going to say, a lot of people tend to stick to tropes because it's very easy. Though, even with sort of like the dwarves are Scottish, that's just
Sure.
like how most people kind of do expect them to be. So it's nice that.
But that's fun.
Yeah, it is nice that people do
Yeah.
other things as well. So.
Yeah, I've been pushing against
Yeah, and I
that.
think it's
when
like,
when I
it's
can.
something I always talk.
No, Steph, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Steph.
No, I was just gonna say, that it's something that I always definitely talk to the author about first. Like if I have an idea, I'll come up with something, but I've always run it by the author first, because maybe they're just like, no, it doesn't work for me. That's not what I had in my head, So I love the collaborative process. I never am like, all right, this is what I'm doing, and then when you listen to it, it's that's just how it is. It's always, I don't know about this girl. She kind of sounds like, I made her kind of like a Valley girl. Like, what do you think? It was kind of like a random choice that I made that I really liked. But if you don't like it, because it was like for instance, this last book that I just finished recording, last chapter, but a new character for several books. And so he's like, no, God, I love it. But I was like, I can re-record it because I'm not really sure. And I didn't have time in the process to like give him a sample. So it was one of those things where I made a decision, and then I'm like, but hey, I can change it if you need me to. Praying to God, he didn't want me to change it. But it's if I didn't pass it by him, then I don't feel good about it. I mean, it doesn't work like that for me.
I think that's
With
one
my authors.
thing I really like with Discord as well, especially with the narrator communities in Discord, is the fact that you can get to see a lot of people working behind the scenes and what goes into character creation. And when like even Jeff does like the little come in with the author, have like a chat, and we'll go through the character voices, and it's really interesting to see how that collaboration does really work. A lot of this is for more indie authors than like for those that work with Podium and stuff and things like that. They don't get to tend to sort of have that character creation stuff. But that's the collaboration side of working with narrators is really interesting and really good. And I'd suggest everyone go into Discord and listen and watch these guys because they're just amazing at it.
Yeah. So on the quick on the accent question, I wanted to throw it to the other three narrators too. What's your process like, study wise, accents? Is there a favorite accent? I'll throw this out to everyone too. Your favorite accent to do. That was a question from Sharon earlier, but your process, and then what's your favorite and most difficult accent that you've done? And we'll start from the top there, with Gary and roundtable it here.
Yeah, I think in terms of study, I was an annoying child, so I would mimic everything I saw on TV and do it for my friends, whether they asked or not, kind of. And so I watched a lot of American TV and a lot of British TV, and so those accents were things I just started to like pick up and parrot back. And so that kind of weirdly prepped me for being able to hopefully do a decent American accent and a decent like RP British accent. I generally what I do if I want to learn an accent, I will find someone who's native, listen to them a lot, try to mimic them, and try to sound as close to them when they say sentences as possible. Just because I don't like. I might have an idea of what an accent sounds like in my head, or I may have seen a movie that was made in a country where the actor was just like, probably sounds like this, did that accent. And if you mimic that actor who's not from that place, you're like, you'll end up with Irish accents like this. And it drives me absolutely insane. So I like to try find native people, mimic them, and try to get that accent in my face before doing it. And in terms of my favorite accent to do, probably British. I don't know why. I find it easier physically to produce, and it doesn't cause as much wear over time as my American accent does. And I don't know why that is. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, Steve?
Well, it feels like all accents or dialects are things that I have to do because even Canadians don't want to hear Canadian accents. So it's kind of one of those things where every book that I'm doing, I have to put on some kind of accent.
Australian.
Yeah, that's the Australian one was definitely, I steered clear of Australian as much as possible. And then I agreed to do a book, and it turned out one of the secondary characters who was a fan favorite was a dark elf from Australia. And I panicked and had flop sweat a lot because I just couldn't get it down. And so I did a lot of work with some dialect coaches on all of my accents, getting rid of my Canadian accent as much as possible. And then with that one, his name, he always talks about himself in the third person. So it's like Blaise is from Australia and he has his bow Celia, and he's going to do anything he can to make it, do anything he can to try and get it to the right place. Like he's going to take care of anything. It's no problem at all. So it's like you're trying to get it right, but you're not quite there yet. So you have to try and work at it to try and get it to be a better accent all the time. So it gets challenging to work on accents constantly because, I mean, any other form of acting, like if you're doing a play or you're in a movie or you're doing a TV show or whatever, you have one character that you're doing. And if they have a different accent, you just live in that accent for that time. We don't have that luxury. We're doing sometimes, 10 accents for a book, and you have to switch between all of them. And so you'll have things that like you wouldn't, I think we talked about it one year where Scottish and Russian is surprisingly challenged to switch between the two because they get so confusing in your mind. So having to switch back and forth between all of the accents is where it gets really challenging because you have so many different characters. So you can't just rest in one accent for a long time and then just move on to the next. So you have to, one of the things that I find challenging is even though I take coaching and dialect coaching on the regular semi-weekly, I'm working with a dialect coach on specific accents. You work on it and then you have to try and keep it up so that you can keep it in your toolbox for later on and other characters. And you feel like you get it down, but then you're like, yes, I got this nailed. Like I was really feeling like I was good with my Australian accent, but I haven't touched it in 5 months, 6 months. So then I go back to do it and I'm like, this is really rough and hard. So then you have to refresh yourself all the time. So you're constantly working on all of your accents and all of your dialects to try and keep them up.
Awesome. Yes. So I've got a question from JD from earlier. two-parter. So if there's a ton of characters, is it difficult to come up with that many different variations? And also, what's your advice for men attempting to do female voices and the opposite? And we'll start with, I guess, Neil.
If there are a ton of characters, it's always, I guess, kind of like I was saying before about how my principal approach to all these is making sure that the listener knows that it's two different people talking at a given time, or three different people talking at a given time, and not having to rely on the attributions, on the he said, she said, they said, in order to do that. But I think a lot of the time, I'm like these other guys here, like all of us, like a lot of narrators. It's really easy and so fun to get lost in the weeds of dialect, particularly when if it's one that you're creating, or if it's a real world dialect and you're getting into the real particulars of it. Because on one part of it is it's so easy to get so deep into an accent that you're like doing like no, but it's like it's not a human being anymore. So or there's not an emotional life that's sort of occupying that line. And I've had to do it where it was literally the same person, because it was time travel. One person came back and was talking to himself. So you had two people named Ben. It's the same person, but they're in different emotional places because of what's happening in the scene. So that in of itself is as much to color one person being distinct from the other person. One person's angry, the other person's sanguine or whatever, and that becomes the distinction between those things. When you start to get into a lot of characters, as so many of these series kind of do, there's all, if it's like goon number 16, there's really only going to be so much you could do to set them apart, like without getting distractive about it in a way that like this guy has a lisp that's not written in or doesn't serve any purpose, doesn't serve the emotional life of the scene. And the listener will forgive you as long as they recognize that this person is going to appear here and he's going to say, hey, stop. And it doesn't have to be a whole production every time you do it. It doesn't have to be like, oh, well, I think I'm going to go with a Geordie accent for this guy just to keep him distinct. Right. Exactly. And so, once you get into all those different things, like I kind of like Steve was saying, maintaining the accuracy of those things, and like Gary was saying, so that it doesn't sort of fall off into caricature is important. But at the same time, what's really driving the scene is the emotional content for me, and so that usually kind of pushes through some of the more technical aspects that I would love to get stuck in, But those are the things, as you get to know a series and you get to know a writer and you work with them over a longer period of time, you gain a sort of fluency in that world, and in terms of how those characters work, and they become more sort of back pocket to swap between three people in a room, and they all have various variations on the same accent, but they're, like I said, they're three different people. They have three different wants. They have three different desires, three different hoped for outcomes of the scene, and that's what makes them distinct from each other at the same time. What was the second part of that question? I forget.
The advice you would give a man doing female voices and vice versa.
Oh yeah. I think that this is where some technical things do help in terms of like where male voices tend to resonate on the lower end, on like in sort of those sort of the larger cavities of the body, whereas higher pitched voices, not even male, female really, resonate in higher parts of your body, like higher vibrations reside up here and lower vibrations reside down here. And I tried to think of, if I'm breaking up high and low, isn't so much about, because not every woman sounds like Minnie Mouse and not every guy sounds like Goofy. I don't know. Should we just talk? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Pluto doesn't talk. That's right. He's a weird mute dog.
Unlike all the talking dogs we have.
Right. And so within each gradation of like female voices and then male voices, I'm not going to push myself to make every woman sound like a squeaky balloon and every male sound like a grinding gravel truck. There are a lot of female voices that are really on a pitch level not much higher than the middle higher end of male voices as well too. So again, it's like it's easy to get lost in the weeds of sounding like a believable full woman's voice, like a woman just suddenly stepped into my booth. There's not a lot of room in here. That would be very difficult. But as long as it's clear that this is a person who feels this way about things and is at a different higher pitch, then I'm not looking to be replicating an entire female voice when it's distinct against the male voice of the person that they're talking to. It's all relative, is what I'm saying in that respect.
It comes down a lot with the male female voices for me personally, in their personality, and when you're dealing with genders, the intention behind what they're saying, right? So you can have an example I usually give is like, if you have a conversation between a man and woman, and the woman says like, "What are you thinking?" "I'm not thinking anything." "I can tell you're thinking about something. Just tell me." "I'm not thinking about anything. Just would you open up to me, please? I just need to know." "Listen, just leave me alone." And so I'm doing almost nothing with my voice, but you can tell
Yeah.
with the intention by way I'm saying, women are more interested in the personal relationship and men are more reserved and pulled back generally. Then it makes it easier for you to distinguish between the genders without having to worry about, well, girls should be way up high, because they aren't, and guys should be way down low, because they aren't. There's some women that sound lower than some men. And I've narrated books where I've done that with a female and a male, where the female sounds lower register than the male in the book. So it's more important about, in all of this stuff, when you're dealing with accents, like Neil was saying, all of your accents, all of your character work, genders, whatever, worry about the intention of the characters and making them sound real and believable, and less about the technically perfect stuff. Because if I give a technically great accent, but the character is completely flat and it's boring, that's horrible. But if I don't give a perfect accent, but you really feel like that character is alive and real, then that's what matters to the listener. They don't care as much about that accent being exactly accurate, because let's face it, even if, like, I have a narrator friend who was born and raised in Manchester and got a book where she had to do a Manchester accent and was glorying in the fact that she got to keep her regular, like, her, this is her specific accent, and then got a number of
Complaints.
reviews that came in that said, she has a terrible Manchester accent. She needs to work on her Manchester accent. And it's like I was born and raised there. Like, come on. So it's one of those things where you have to take it all with a grain of salt when you're doing this stuff.
I get that.
I do have
accents.
I do have to say, Neil was talking about this, and I mean, hopefully you guys can have a better one than this. When it comes to differentiating between characters, I had one book that I had to do that I was like, what am I going to do with this? Because the main character was able to duplicate himself and also to change his duplications, and was also able to resurrect different people. So he had a female character that he resurrected, and then he needed to create a diversion and a distraction. So he ended up creating 3 versions of himself, and 3 versions of her. One of the versions of her was him posing as her, and then another one was her posing as him, and then there was one where it was actually him, and one where it was a duplicate of him, but it was him. And then there was another one of her that was a duplicate of her, but still her. And so the 6 of them all had a conversation together, and I had to try and figure out how to navigate who was talking with who when you have 3 personifications as far as like what they look like, but one was swapped gendered, one was swapped gendered the other way, and then 2 were just duplicate copies of the original 2 that were in there, and they were all arguing with each other. And I was like, what? Help me, dear Lord. So yeah.
We're all confused.
Yeah, I had to try and figure out which person was talking at which time to try and make it more clear so that the people listening could actually follow what was happening and who was saying what. That was a challenge.
So this is along the same lines. Coming in for a question from James for Stephanie. How are you able to do male voices so well? I swear you had a guy doing it with you, but when I looked, it was only you.
It was only you.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, like everyone has said, I mean, it's like when I was doing radio, we had like our kind of like a little radio team went in for some kind of like vocal training and stuff, and they figured out where everybody was, like, their what key they were in. And I was in the same key as the Irish guy. We had to sit like we literally spoke at the exact same level. He spoke, we were just at the same. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just try to drop down as low as I can, and then like Neil was talking about, it's also about placement. It's like, is it like deeper, deeper in my chest? Is it a warmer tone? Is it the guy that's got a little bit of a rasp to, there's like just different things that you can add and attribute. And like, I think it was Steve was talking about, is also how you approach the person, right? Like how they speak. Like you're saying, there's like kind of a bit of a gruffness sometimes, and somehow some people approach certain things. And I think just anything you can do to separate stuff. I mean, look, I do a sapphic epic fantasy series. Okay, so it's like literally everyone, like over 100 people, maybe 5 of them are guys, and there's like only 2 accents in that whole world. So it's like you have to really rely on your acting skills there. Like Neil was talking about, how different is each person, and if someone's going to have kind of a lighter tone, how do they use that? Are they the mousy type with a lighter tone? Do they kind of like a breathy voice that's like more, stronger? So the same with the guys, so I think I just try to and I get to work with people like Neil and Neil Thorne and, these guys who are just have great examples of characters and stuff, so that when I listen to them and listen to their character samples, it also helps to, if we're doing like something that's like, together as a dual narration, for instance, I just pull from a lot of people that I think I know, and I just try to keep it, I try to go as low as I can and kind of just sit in that area. And I can't really do actually I can do a good Neil, but I don't do it often. So, it doesn't go a long time. So, just things like that. I try to just,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question, James. Sorry.
Also,
I think it's about
female orc, male elf. Like, how do you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
female
was so
dragon,
good. That
male
was so good.
unicorn.
So a question came
you
in
need
from
some-
Byron.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, go ahead. No, it's okay.
Question came in from Byron. Do you guys just switch accents while you're out shopping for fun?
Of
Sometimes.
course.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
not? Yeah.
I do it talking to myself often, which if you
Yes.
were watching from outside, it'd be like, what is wrong with that person? But I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
The
My
worst thing
family's
is,
always like, what are you doing? Who are you
So the-
talking to? And I'm like, no, me. I'm talking to myself.
the worst thing is when I've been with any of you, like anywhere in the States, whatever, is I'll be talking to, oh, your voice would be so good for this, and I'll be like, no, please don't use me.
But
Oh,
we love it
all
so
you guys,
much.
I mean, for the series of Jez that I do that are all these Geordie accents, it's all of your guys' voices. It's you and
I
Kev,
know.
and it's like, and so I have to be like, wait, say that again, Book. Are
Yeah.
you serious? That's how you say that word, Book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really? All right, that's how you pick it up. I do a lot of sort of
It
like
is.
just like that mumbling like Gary's talking about going on the street when you're particularly in the midst of like you're in deep study for a particular accent, like it's the main character, and I realized I had a main character, a Scottish main character, and I realized up until that point I've been completely faking Scots. I had not really been doing it. I've been doing like the dwarven version of it, which is not real. This was an actual, which is fine. You can get away with it if it's an invented accent of sorts or a fantasy accent. But when it's a legitimate person from an actual specific town and you have to be real about it, you're wandering down the street and saying, sister, like, because you're testing that S sound, just because like, oh, why does sister sound better than sister, but then
you just say, can you say that again?
yeah. Well, and to what
something.
Jeff was saying before too, I did a trip to Scotland, and
Yeah.
around the time where I knew I was going to be doing that book, so I was at a friend's wedding and talking with with his relatives, which is a very it's a very great way to write off the entire trip. I didn't write off the whole thing, but but then of course, like the more the evening goes on, the more it's like, wait, what are you saying? the technically accurate Scots accent 4 hours into a wedding is not something I can actually use because it's it's not as intelligible. So you make little cheats in that respect.
So I've got a question from Nathan. Have you ever attempted an accent or a voice, flub it horribly, and then realize you've created something awesome and used it later? Do you want to take? We'll start back at the top. Let's start back at the top here.
I don't know about an accent. I've definitely tried to do an impression and absolutely not done a good job of it, but was like, hey, that doesn't sound anything like the impression I was trying to do, which means it's mine. And so I've created a character I can do now because of my shitty Gandalf impression. Poopy Gandalf impression. But and yeah, sometimes you can kind of like blend too, maybe if you like, oh, I like the eyes from New Zealand, so and I like the Scottish from somewhere else. It's hard to keep up unless you really know what, like, I'm specifically doing this on every one of these vowel sounds or consonants. But yeah, impression, yes. I don't think accent. If I've done a bad job in an accent, I usually go, I'm doing a terrible job. You sure you want me? Are you sure?
Are you sure?
Steve?
Yeah, I think the closest I could come, I've never had an accent that I'm with Gary. Like if I'm flubbing up an accent, I'm like, oh gosh, okay, it's time for me to take a break and get some coaching so I can get it better. But I did have one accident that happened that was kind of a funny thing, because I was doing a book where he was an assassin, and he just continually for 2 books straight was coming up to a group of guards or mercenaries or bandits or whatever, and there would be like 3 or 4 of them. They would say like 2 or 3 lines, and then he would murder them all. And then there'd be a new one, and he would murder them all. And so the 27th time that this happens, you're like, okay, great. What are we going to do with these guys? Like, we have another group of guys that we need another voice for. And one of them said A-E-H at the end of their sentence that they had. And I was like, we're live on Discord. And so I kind of joked, hey, he must be Canadian. And they're like, yes, do a Canadian accent. I was like, okay, we can finally work this in. And so we ended up doing I did a horrible impression of Patrick from SpongeBob as a Canadian, and gave the guard that accent. And so we did the voice, and they were like, yes. And I said, okay, the only way that this is staying in the book is if you guys all promise you're going to review and say, I love the Canadian guard, so that people can, appreciate what we were doing there. So they agreed, and I ended up having a Canadian guard that shows up in this random fantasy. There's oh yeah, okay, so this is what we're going to do, eh? All right.
And that's how the
Okay.
Canadian Guard got
I
a
love
spin-off
it.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. That's a deeply serious romantic lead.
Yeah.
Stephanie,
You're so
do you ever have a
beautiful.
flub?
Sorry.
Do you ever have a flub that you kept? A voice that you might have dropped off for this. The question was, did you ever make a mistake on an accent but decided that it was a good thing and kept it in the toolbox for later?
No, I don't think I have, because I don't take a lot of chances with things that I'm not very, very secure with in theory. Although, I mean, like, but do you guys, I'm asking, like, I want to know from like Gary and Neil and Steve, because like with this last book I just recorded with Neil, this Ashbab, The Rise of Ashbab, like I created some, like accents and characters that I have never worked, like I've never utilized before. Sometimes you have like these people you come to all the time and you use like a certain whatever. And I just had this character, and she talks like this, and I fell in love with her. She's like kind of like a Natasha Lyonne kind of character. She's like a really dirty detective, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love her, and she's
I
just
love
like
her
not
now
a nice
too. That
person.
sounds awesome.
When you busted
She's
that,
like,
that,
that is-
it sounded so out back pocket to me that it was like, oh, and like the archetype of Natasha Lyonne jumped right out at me, and it's perfect for the character too. And it's like, oh, she must be in your like stock. We all
Yeah.
Never
have
had
them,
her.
like, their stock characters.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
we
Right.
write all these
exactly.
different books. Yeah.
Mhm.
So do you guys have someone like that too, that you kind of like just happened upon, and you're like, oh shit, I love that character. Like I love that character because of what you've created, the voice wise.
I have. This was an Ashbab, but he comes up a lot too. It's kind of that same idea of this is not the flub thing, but it's the people I cast. Like, I just love casting Sam Elliott whenever I can.
Yeah.
And like from the mustache down, basically, and it doesn't come, it depends on what the book is or the world is, and this kind of harkens back to a conversation we had earlier. I've been kind of doing a thing recently where I understand the archetype thing that Dawn was talking about in terms of stock characters, but I've been kind of like pushing against that a little bit. And in certain kind of books, it doesn't work for all of them. Being, what if instead of like a Tolkien-esque spread of characters like British elves and all that, we had everyone's, middle, Plains Americans, or Southern or other things like that, and kind of getting those other kind of like those other kind of blend of voices into it that tell the same sort of divisions between culture and class and region and things like that, but just use a different palette instead of the one that everyone's kind of used to. Again, it doesn't work for everything, and there's utility sometimes to, you know, relying upon those types too. But the other one that I was thinking of, and this is also was sort of in Oshbob, but it also sort of is in Good Guys and Bad Books with Eric Uegland, and it's with the kobolds, all the you know, in one of the earlier books, I was doing something with the character that seemed right for it, and I wasn't sure what I was doing until a little bit into it, and then I stopped and went to ask the author. I said, like, hey, I feel like all of the kobolds sound like kind of like they're speaking in broken French. How do you feel about that? And he's like, I love that idea, and went with it. But then it became kind of a thing where, as the series went on, and this also talks to what Dawn was saying before. It's one of the great things about the work that we do in the genre, the way it manifests itself with knowing the authors and working along with them as the series develops, because what started to happen is that started to fold back into more kobolds as we meet them, speaking more like noticeably broken French as it kind of went along. And then we made the decision that all of the dragonkin were speaking in French. And so then when we had an actual dragon come on later on, we're like, well, I guess we have to make Gurganath very French. He's a very French dragon, you know. But it's those kind of happy accidents and the way that they grow organically and naturally with the development of the series and the collaboration, in this case, kind of uniquely between the narrator and the author, that develops into something really great. And so then the variation was with the goblins in Oshbob, it was like a more Eastern European of it, but the energy is very much the same as the kobolds. They're like, hello, hi, good to see you, you know. But then with this certain tweaks to make it more vaguely like Eastern European than I guess very Western European, but same little green dudes basically.
I'd just like to say, like you said about the collaboration side of things, I think with working with narrators, like you said, when you get so close to working with someone like you guys, you actually start to write the kind of characters with the voices in mind as well. So you actually really get that bounce back sort of like, oh, this is exactly how Neil would say this line, or like Stephanie would scream or cry, or, you know, and this is
me cry?
Yeah.
Me cry?
Always. But
yeah, always.
It's always that's the real joy of working closely with people that are really talented, is they can really, you get more emotion into your characters and more background because of that back and forth with your narrators, which I think is very important.
To answer Stephanie's question, I did have a very specific one. It was years ago, but I was watching Star Wars Rebels at the time, I think, and I had a book come up, and it was a male romance, and the uncle in that was like, oh, he's just a cool dude. He's gonna be, he won't be important. So I did an impression of Grand Admiral Thrawn from that TV series, thinking like, oh, he's got such a cool voice. Turns out he was the lead for the next book, and I was like, okay, I'm glad I picked a cool accent because I actually really like him. But it just, when I heard the guy, I think it's Mads Mikkelsen's brother who does his voice. I was like, that's such a cool voice. His cadence is so cool. I just want to do it in a book.
Let's hear it.
Can I do it? He's sort of had a really. It's like, I talk very slowly, and I'm almost not British, but it was it was like, because he's not British. But I was just like, I just wanted to sort of do that languid. Oh yes, I'm just a silly boy, and you are nothing. You're silly. I hate you. Go away from me.
Oh, I want one of those characters now.
Yes, but don't you love? I mean, that was years ago, and it still stuck with you. That character.
Yeah. As soon as you read it, I was like, yes, I have one of those.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
Great.
So a comment way earlier, it was in working with authors, and especially in this genre, you're going to get a lot of names, places, items, things that are phonetically challenging. What's your process like along the phonetic side in working with an author? And Dawn, you can weigh in here. And in your writing, has it ever come up that you've had to change something specifically for narration in terms of pronunciation, that sort of thing?
I think like when I first started writing, I used to use all the weird hyphens and all kinds in my sci-fi. A very famous person said to me on one of the forums one day was, please take all of them out. Just stop doing things like that. So I kind of think a little bit more phonetically, probably the most, especially now with working with a lot more narrators. But I think working with them, if they come across a name that they specifically cannot say right, and you had it in your mind as being, I want it this way, it is a lot easier for you to just change the way you think about it, although it's hard for them, for them to, get it wrong 10 million times in a book. The obvious one that always comes up in a lot of panels, and we did this in Dragon Con, was like the way people pronounce mana. It's
yeah.
it's like everyone's just got used to one way of saying it. So it's a case of just whichever flows properly for the spoken word. Don't make it complicated. And if it's a lot of creative. Neil's got a lot to say there, but yeah,
it's true. I do.
Oh,
that's my view anyway. But be prepared to kind of think differently about your word choices.
But I mean, we always check, right? I mean, I always have like when I'm prepping, I always make my list, or I ask the author ahead of time. If you have any kind of names, places, locations, and let me know how you want it to be said. Otherwise, anything that I find that's like abnormal, like not English, I always just say, is this, and I do it like more like, is it this, and then the author, like Kyle, I just did this with him, and he came back and he's like, actually it's pronounced like this or pronounced like this, and I'm like, oh my god, perfect. And don't write it out. For me, I'm not good with, because I think a lot of people, if you don't know IPA or whatever, like you think you're writing it in a way that's very clear to you, whereas I might interpret it completely different. So for me, I just love a voice file from an author. Just hop up on your phone. Give me your names. Tell me. That's just so much better than I can refer to that constantly, because writing something like you think is phonetically correct could be completely different as how I read that. Especially for me, I had a whole book where I didn't realize, because I live in Switzerland, I was pronouncing something in a very German way in my head, not realizing that it was a German way, because I've just been here for 20 years. And then it was like, so then the other person did the whole book, and they said it more than me, so I had to go back and change it. I had no idea that I was saying it in a German way. I just didn't get, because it was phonetically written out in a way that it was just, so just have your author pronounce it for you. I think it's just the easiest thing. It's just
absolutely
best.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fully agree.
Yeah. That's been something that's been challenging for me as a Canadian, is learning, because when you're talking about people writing things out phonetically, I had a list that was sent to me by a publisher that said, these are the pronunciations, or these are the vowel sounds that we use for this. And I was like, that's really helpful. But they had like AH is like, they would say, we say AH like you would say father and brother. And I'm like, I say brother differently than I say father. So why is that the example? How are you saying brother? Hey, brother, father. I'm like, what is happening? So those are examples of where they use these.
He's my father.
These vowel sounds, or they put it in there, but they don't know how to stress it correctly, right? So if you put, you just assume that the stress is in another place. That can change the way a word sounds completely.
People ignore stress more than pronunciation.
Yeah. And
also,
there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And it is great when if we're able to contact the author and ask them about it. And then if the author actually gives you a pronunciation, just goes, I don't know, I just thought the word looked cool, do whatever you want with it. Which seems like, oh, great.
That happens a lot.
I have the creative freedom, but it's a huge responsibility, because then you go and you're like, okay, I'm going to decide the way this word is being pronounced, and that's going to be canon as far as this series goes. But a lot of people could be like, that's a terrible way to pronounce it, that's not right at all, and then you're on the hook, because even you look at it later on. I actually am doing a book right now where I'm working on book 2, and I'm having to go back and going, what did I say for that word? How did I pronounce that name? And then I was like, oh, I don't like the way I decided that pronunciation at all. Man, I wish I would have, but it's too late, right? So yeah, it's nicer when you don't feel the responsibility to decide the way a pronunciation is going to go.
It does come up a lot in our genre with all the different fantasy worlds and races and stuff. It's definitely something that authors can think a little bit more about. But obviously, if you don't listen to audiobooks or anything like that, you really kind of don't understand how words are spoken.
Yeah.
So it gets very interesting in Discord listening to those kinds of conversations too.
Yeah.
So Jeff Hayes has a question. What percentage of your character voices are inspired by cartoons from the 80s and 90s?
I mean, come on, that's not a fair question. All of them.
Yeah, I had an alien pop up in one of my books, and their attitude just screamed Marvin the Martian to me. And so I was like, I have to, because it was like, the accelerator. So that alien race absolutely sounded like Marvin the Martian. So
That's
yeah,
brilliant.
I'm all, I mean, I guess that's a little bit earlier than the 80s and 90s, but
We've got about 5 minutes left in our time, and so Kyle has asked, and please give me an example of a character who is a snobbish woman carrying a cigarette holder. And we'll start with Gary.
A snobbish woman, cigarette holder.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, I do not like you. You will step out of my way or I will trample over you because I am carrying a Louis Vuitton bag and my shoes are more expensive than your life.
Nice.
That's what I imagine they would sound like.
Don, you're up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
No, I
Yeah,
can't
sure.
do that. No,
I'm
I
sure
can't.
you can.
Oh, no, thank you.
All right, Steve.
oh gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to beat that. All I'm thinking about is Gary's awesome performance there. That was amazing.
I gave her such a backstory.
Why the hell do you think that you are better than me? I want you to know that I could take you out and I could beat you, or I could take you out and show you the most amazing
Oh,
time.
Steve.
She's getting fresh.
Now I just want a
Neil,
cigarette.
you get a bar here.
I have to do the same thing, right? This is the sort of the.
Oh, yes,
I don't have any
this is
cigarettes. in my
I didn't have a pen, so I
character
just
study here.
Yeah.
This is my cigarette pen.
Okay. It's darling. I can't possibly understand how you could not take that cigarette and shove it right into your eye.
Thanks.
And
Very good.
Stephanie.
I mean, I just want to think like just completely transatlantic, right? Like, how dare you look at me like this?
Mm.
You know, who do you think you are?
Mm.
By the way, how much does that cost over there? Actually, never mind. I don't even have, I have no money with me because I don't need money with me, right? So I just think completely transatlantic when I think of
Yeah.
someone who's looking
That's
down
so
from
great.
everybody
I
else,
love
right?
that
But
accent.
isn't it funny how that character is not and none of these interpretations was a nice person.
No.
It was like, oh, I just gave billions of dollars to charity.
I'm a dirty snob, but I'm very nice.
Oh, you seem very kind, and I appreciate your supplemental materials. You know, it's like
No.
You guys just inspire all kinds of characters with the way you do things. It's great.
So we're,
I mean, and any one of us, the whole thing is any one of us could do that also with a completely different accent.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Same person.
Yeah.
we've seen
Right.
with four different of that same woman around a poker table. Together,
Yeah,
you know, I'd love to do that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that's
That'd be great.
the next book is just four snobby
Playing
women
poker.
with cigarette holders playing
Playing poker.
poker.
There were
Chain
three
smoking
characters
women.
too, but now
Lit
they're not.
RPG Golden Girls.
Mm.
Oh
That'd
wait!
be awesome.
Oh my God! NaNoWriMo. That's. Thank you so much, Gary. There we go. That's.
Did
That's
you
what
see
I'm
the
writing.
thing where they said that now the people from Friends are now the same age as the women
The Golden Girls.
on the
Girls.
Golden
Yeah.
Girls? And so
Yeah.
now what they need to do is do a new series where it's Golden Friends. And so we just have them all in a retirement community hanging out together.
Yeah,
That's
I want to.
awesome.
I want to see it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Could we be any older?
So we've got like 30 seconds. Anything anyone wants to plug, things that you're doing, things that you want to put out to the world, final comments. Stephanie.
I've just worked on this wonderful series for Podium, City of Artem with Rise of Ashbab, with Tailspin, Dawn's book with Neil Thorin. It was it's amazing. I love the idea. Like Lars is in it, Jez is book, and Kevin Sinclair, Dawn. I mean, that there's 8 books, they're all around one world and everything interconnects. I love that whole idea of it, and I've just enjoyed working on it so much. I'm working on a book with Kyle Johnson, Drone Rising series. That's absolutely amazing, Lit RPG. That these books are coming out soon. So yeah, that's it for me.
Neil,
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
thank you for coming.
Thanks for letting me crash. I don't know how that happened exactly, but I just kind of said this before. I'm going to kind of say it again because like looking around these faces here too. And I was saying this to Stephanie the other day about how every book I did in the last like month and a half were all written by friends of mine. Or produced by friends of mine, and that's doesn't happen a lot. And I will try to never take that for granted. And I really appreciate it. And a lot of those people are here and are on other panels during the rest of this con. So please go check them all out. And because it's a good time and we're all buddies.
It is.
Steve?
Well, I had to take the place of Jeff Hayes, who was not able to be here in person, although he was able to come and hang out in the chats. So I'm going to plug something, and him and I are working on together. This is a book that's been a long time coming, and it's going to be coming out, I think, at the end of the month here. We're doing it as a serial format for the narration, and it's Industrial Strength Magic by Macronomicon. And oh my goodness. I mean, I'm a fan of Macronomicon stuff. This is going to be my third series with him, but getting Sound Booth Theater involved in this project was brilliant. They are incredible, and having the opportunity to work with them, with Jeff, with Justin, Annie's on there as well. It's going to be, I'm really excited about it. So yeah, that's one to watch out for sure.
Awesome. Lots of comments about Steve doing a book with Jeff. So yeah, there's excitement out there. Dawn, what do you got to plug?
Just Tailspin and the City of Autumn. It's just been a fantastic experience, especially with working with everybody with the whole thing. So yeah, short and sweet. By City of Autumn, all of them.
Awesome.
City of Autumn.
And last but not least, Gary.
For like Lit RPG, I'm working on the Turning series by Kenny King and doing some voices in the Deep Dive Sound Booth Theater Dungeon Crawler Carol episodes. So go listen to all of them. They're fun. And keep listening to audiobooks all the time, every day.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. That's our time today. Hope everyone learned something. And yeah.
We'll
Thank you,
online.
everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.